They laughed at him. They mocked his uniform. They thought he was just another server. They were dead wrong. At the heart of the stunning Greenwood estate, 20 acres of manicured gardens, shimmering fountains, and white linen tents, moved Marcus Johnson, the man everyone thought they could overlook. Champagne flutes clinked, diamonds flashed, laughter rang out like brittle glass. And yet, through it all, Marcus floated like a ghost, dressed sharply in black and white, carrying trays of golden hors d'oeuvres with a grace that seemed too poised, too sure. Most guests didn't notice him, not at first. But for those who did, a flicker of unease passed quickly, buried under arrogance. Little did they know, Marcus wasn't there to serve drinks. He was there to serve a lesson they would never forget. Stay with us. The moment of truth is closer than you think. At first, the insults were casual, almost playful. Two women draped in pastel gowns, sipping $200 glasses of champagne, snickered behind manicured hands. "At least this one knows how to balance a tray," one said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. A man in a custom navy suit leaned toward his friend with a smirk, whispering, "Good with their hands, aren't they? Must run in the blood." The laughter stung the air like cheap perfume, but Marcus didn't flinch. His smile, calm, professional, almost regal, stayed firmly in place. He had heard it all before, and he had long mastered the art of walking through rooms that were never built for him, and leaving with more than anyone ever expected. Across the vast lawn, waiters moved in well-rehearsed patterns. But Marcus moved differently. There was a certainty in his steps, a quiet authority hidden in plain sight. Occasionally he would pause, phone pressed lightly to his ear. He spoke in clipped, business-like tones, not confirming table settings or drink orders. No, these were the kinds of calls made by people who signed checks, not fetched them. Few noticed. Most were too wrapped in their own world of caviar and casual cruelty to care. But if they had looked closely, really looked, they would have seen the small signs unraveling around them. The event planner, a flustered woman in stilettos, rushing to Marcus's side with a frantic deference reserved only for someone far above her pay grade. The estate manager, clipboard in hand, lowering his head slightly in Marcus's presence. The subtle but undeniable ripple in the room whenever Marcus passed by. A gravity he carried effortlessly, as if the ground itself acknowledged him even when people refused to. He wasn't a ghost. He was the architect of everything they saw, and soon they would realize it in a way they would never forget. Stay tuned, because the real revelation, it's just beginning. As the golden California sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the manicured lawns, the celebration shifted gears. The champagne flowed faster. The laughter grew louder, brittle, forced, almost desperate. Marcus moved like a conductor, orchestrating a silent symphony no one else even knew they were part of. Guests barely spared him a glance now, comfortable in their imagined superiority. To them, he was just a uniform, another body floating between tables laden with filet mignon and crystal glasses. "Hey, buddy, make sure my drink's cold this time," a red-faced guest barked, tossing the words without looking up. Marcus simply nodded, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across his lips. He was used to being underestimated. In fact, he counted on it. But the cracks in the illusion had started to spread. Vendors and florists, caterers, audio techs, who should have been buried in their own tasks, all paused when Marcus passed. A respectful nod here, a whispered "yes sir" there. Not the way you speak to a server, the way you address the man writing the checks. At the service entrance, the estate manager, an older man with thinning gray hair and a clipboard trembling slightly in his hands, approached Marcus. He leaned in, voice low and deferential, as Marcus calmly signed off on something. The groom's father, a man known for his booming voice and chest-thumping bravado, glanced nervously at Marcus more than once during his rounds. Not curious glances, not polite ones. No, these were the looks of a man who knew he was standing close to real power and wasn't sure how to behave anymore. Still, the crowd, wrapped tight in their own arrogance, didn't see it or chose not to. After all, how could the man carrying canapes possibly be anything more? How could the man they mocked possibly be the one holding all the cards? It was easier to ignore the slight stiffness in the event planner's voice when she addressed Marcus. Easier to overlook the estate manager's slight bow of the head. Easier to believe the world fit neatly into their tidy little hierarchies. But some stories don't reveal their endings until the final page, and Marcus Johnson had patiently written every single word leading to this one. Under the glittering canopy of fairy lights and chandeliers hung from ancient oak trees, the celebration reached its peak. The band played a lively tune. Children chased each other barefoot across the grass. Women clutched their designer handbags. Men slapped each other on the back, basking in their own imagined importance. And through it all, Marcus moved, silent, composed, untouchable. Occasionally, he would catch his reflection in a polished tray, the sharp lines of his tailored vest, the gleam of polished shoes, the deep, proud tone of his skin against the stark white of his shirt. A king disguised as a servant. Every snicker, every careless dismissal sharpened his focus. Not with anger, not with resentment, with purpose. Because Marcus knew the truth, like all the best stories, wasn't something you shouted. It was something you revealed at precisely the right moment. And that moment was almost here. Stay close. The stage is set, and soon everything they thought they knew will be shattered. The music softened. The chatter died down into an uneasy hum. And then, like the first drop of a coming storm, the father of the groom stepped onto the small stage set at the center of the lawn. He fumbled the microphone in his large hands, clearing his throat awkwardly. The paper he clutched trembled slightly. Whether from nerves or something deeper, no one could say. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cracking through the speakers, "if I could have just a moment of your time." The crowd shuffled, glasses half raised, curiosity flickering. He paused, scanning the sea of glittering jewelry and silk ties, his face strangely solemn. "Today," he continued, "is not just a celebration of love. It is a celebration of legacy, of generosity, of greatness that often goes unseen." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Eyebrows arched. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. This wasn't the speech they were expecting. "There's someone here today," the father of the groom said, voice growing steadier, "who made all of this possible. Someone who asked for no recognition. Someone who could have easily stayed hidden, but whose generosity deserves to be honored." He stopped, took a shaky breath, and then, with a deliberate, unmistakable motion, he turned and pointed. Right at Marcus Johnson. A stunned silence detonated across the lawn. Marcus, standing near a white tent pole, tray still balanced in one hand, froze for just a fraction of a second. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Him, the server, the caterer. The disbelief was palpable, thick as fog. The father of the groom pressed on, his voice thick with emotion. "Many years ago," he said, "when my late father was struggling to save our family's legacy, there was a young man who stepped in, a man who invested not because he had to, but because he believed in a dream." He glanced again toward Marcus, and this time, even the most oblivious guest followed his gaze. "That man," he said, "built something extraordinary. And when we needed help planning this wedding, when the costs became overwhelming, it was Marcus Johnson who stepped forward, quietly, without asking for anything in return." Another beat of stunned silence. You could almost hear hearts pounding against ribs. The same mouths that had been laughing now hung open. The same eyes that had dismissed him now couldn't look away. Some guests stared at their champagne glasses, as if hoping to disappear into them. Others shifted uncomfortably, their expensive shoes scuffing against the lawn. Marcus stood still, not gloating, not smirking, only offering a slight respectful nod. A king who never needed to wear a crown to be recognized. The father of the groom's voice broke slightly as he finished. "Marcus, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. This day, this moment, exists because of you." And with that, he set the microphone down with a trembling hand and stepped back. For a long, heavy heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, awkwardly, The guests began to clap. A few at first, then more. Not the easy, careless applause they had given the band or the best man's speech. This was different. This was slow, heavy, weighted with shame. Because as they clapped, they knew. They had judged the man who had built the very world they stood on. They had laughed at greatness and now stood exposed in their own smallness. Marcus, for his part, didn't bask in the applause. He didn't take a bow. He didn't stride to the stage. He didn't deliver some fiery speech about respect and dignity. He simply set the tray he was holding on a nearby table, smoothed the front of his crisp vest, and nodded once more. The gesture of a man who knew exactly who he was, no matter who else forgot. Around him, the wedding crowd buzzed in awkward tension. Some guests tried to approach, offering sheepish smiles and outstretched hands. "I had no idea," one man mumbled, shame flushing his face. "You should have said something," another woman whispered, her voice brittle with guilt. Marcus just smiled, that same soft, steady smile. "No need," he said quietly. "Some things are better shown than told." And with that, he moved gracefully through the stunned crowd, refilling a few glasses, adjusting a centerpiece knocked askew in the commotion, acting as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Marcus Johnson had never needed their validation. He had never needed to shout his worth. He had simply built his empire, brick by brick, promise by promise, until one day the world had no choice but to see it. Real greatness, after all, doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It stands quietly, unshakable, undeniable, and unstoppable. And as the sun finally slipped behind the hills, casting the Greenwood estate in a halo of gold, Marcus Johnson remained exactly where he had always been, at the heart of it all. Stay tuned. Because what Marcus built was only the beginning. The applause faded, leaving behind a thick, uncomfortable silence. It was a silence heavy with realization, embarrassment, and a quiet, gnawing shame. The guests, those same polished men and women who had tossed out careless jokes and patronizing smiles, now stood adrift in the sprawling lawn of Greenwood Estate, clutching their flutes of champagne as if they could somehow hide behind them. No one quite knew what to do. No one knew what to say. Because how do you apologize for disrespecting someone you didn't even bother to truly see? Some tried. They approached Marcus in hesitant, shuffling steps, their designer shoes sinking into the soft grass. A man with a Rolex gleaming on his wrist extended his hand awkwardly. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know." A woman in a shimmering gold dress stammered, You should have said something. We would have treated you differently." Marcus tilted his head slightly, offering the faintest smile. "There's no need," he said, voice low, calm. "How you treat someone you think is nobody says more than how you treat someone you think is a somebody." The words, simple and unspoken like a mirror, cut sharper than any accusation ever could. The woman blushed furiously, lowering her gaze, unable to hold Marcus's eyes. Across the estate, small clusters of guests whispered among themselves, their faces tight with awkwardness. Gone was the loud, brash laughter. Gone were the smug sideways glances. In their place, stolen looks, quick sips of champagne, and the kind of stilted small talk made only by those desperate to escape the weight of their own guilt. Marcus, however, was untouched by it all. He moved through the crowd with the same quiet grace he had shown all afternoon, refilling glasses, adjusting centerpieces, smiling when smiled at. But make no mistake, he was not invisible anymore. Every step he took now rippled through the crowd. Every movement demanded a kind of reverence they didn't know how to give, and yet Marcus asked for nothing. He didn't need their groveling apologies. He didn't crave their validation. He had built his life and his legacy on foundations much stronger than their fleeting approval. Some of the guests tried harder, desperate to erase their earlier arrogance. "Mr. Johnson," one man said, his voice thick with forced warmth, "you must join us at the head table." Another offered, "We should arrange a toast in your honor." Marcus simply smiled again, that infuriatingly calm, knowing smile, and shook his head politely. "Tonight isn't about me," he said. It's about the bride and groom, and with that, he turned away, leaving them to stew in their own discomfort. Because Marcus understood something most of them never would. True power doesn't need to announce itself. True class doesn't need to demand attention. It simply exists, undeniable, immovable, like a mountain rising silently against the horizon. Across the estate, the celebration sputtered back to life in fits and starts. The band played a new song, something light and cheerful, but it didn't have the same energy. The laughter was quieter now, the conversations more cautious. Everywhere Marcus moved, space parted naturally around him, as if the very air had shifted in recognition. And perhaps in some small way, it had. Because once you've seen real greatness, you can't unsee it. You can't unlearn the truth that for every person you judge by their uniform, their skin, or their silence, you might be standing in the shadow of a king. Marcus eventually made his way back to the service tent near the edge of the lawn. There, out of the direct line of sight, he took a moment. He exhaled slowly, looking out over the estate he had quietly helped create, the celebration he had quietly made possible. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, casting everything in a warm, forgiving light. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. A black and white image of an older man with kind eyes and a weathered smile. The groom's grandfather. The man who had once taken a chance on a young, ambitious Marcus Johnson when no one else would. Marcus smiled, a real unguarded smile this time. "This one's for you, old man," he whispered under his breath. No one heard him, and that was exactly the way he wanted it. Because Marcus hadn't come to Greenwood Estate to be applauded. He hadn't come to collect accolades. He had come to honor a debt of gratitude, to pay forward a kindness that had once changed his life. And in doing so, he had given a lesson far greater than any check could ever buy. That true greatness isn't about how loudly you're recognized. It's about how quietly you uplift the world around you. And sometimes the strongest kings wear no crowns. They simply wear a quiet smile and walk through the world completely unstoppable. But Marcus Johnson's story isn't done yet. There's one more moment coming, a final silent triumph that will leave the entire crowd forever changed. Stay with us, because the best stories, they don't end at the revelation. They begin. Some guests, unable to bear the weight of what had just been revealed, retreated to the bar, pretending to be thirsty. Others busied themselves checking their phones, faking urgent messages that weren't there. It was easier, after all, to hide in distraction than to confront the truth now staring them in the face. But not everyone ran. A few guests, the ones with quieter eyes, the ones who had perhaps always suspected there was more to Marcus Johnson than a starched uniform, stayed rooted in place. They watched him with a new kind of reverence, their minds racing to replay every past interaction, every casual dismissal they wished now they could take back. One elderly woman, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, clutched the arm of her husband. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I told you," she whispered fiercely. "There was something about him. I told you." Her husband said nothing. Because what could he say? He had laughed too. He had assumed too. And now he stood exposed. Not by Marcus's words, but by Marcus's silent, unflinching dignity. Across the estate, pockets of conversations buzzed like uneasy static. "What do you think he's really worth?" someone murmured, as if trying to reframe Marcus's value in terms they could more easily understand. Money, status, power. But they missed the point entirely. Marcus's worth was never something that could be calculated in dollars and cents. It was woven into the very fabric of the evening itself. The elegance, the generosity, the quiet strength holding everything together. He didn't just pay for the wedding. He set the standard for what true class looks like. Meanwhile, Marcus moved with the same measured pace, not slow, deliberate, not hurried, sovereign. Each step he took seemed to say, "I know who I am. Do you?" At the champagne fountain, a young server barely out of high school looked at Marcus with wide, awestruck eyes. To her, he wasn't just a success story. He was a possibility. Marcus noticed her gaze. He offered a small, knowing nod, a silent encouragement. "Keep walking, keep building." It was a tiny exchange, invisible to most, but it mattered, because Marcus wasn't just reshaping the perceptions of the powerful that night. He was planting seeds for the next generation too. Seeds of dignity, seeds of pride, seeds of quiet, relentless ambition. Not all reactions were noble. Some guests doubled down, clinging to their bruised egos like lifeboats. They told themselves Marcus must have wanted it this way, wanted to be undercover. They whispered about how they sometimes liked to play games, blending in to catch people off guard. Anything to avoid facing the real story, that they had revealed themselves, not Marcus. The ugly parts, the smallness, the blind arrogance. And there was no hiding from that mirror now. But Marcus didn't spend time on them. He understood that not every heart could be reached, not every mind could be opened, and that was fine. He wasn't here to win a popularity contest. He was here to honor a promise, fulfill a legacy, and move forward. The evening air grew cooler, a soft breeze stirring the edges of the tent. The sunset had burned itself out, leaving a rich indigo sky punctuated by a scattering of early stars. It should have been the perfect close to a perfect day. And it was, but not in the way the guests had imagined. They had come for a fairy tale wedding. Near the dance floor, the bride, radiant in her lace gown, found Marcus. She slipped away from a crowd of bridesmaids and overzealous relatives, ignoring the whispered warnings to stay with your guests. She stood in front of Marcus, small and fierce. "Thank you," she said simply. Marcus smiled, a deeper, warmer smile than he had offered anyone else. "For what?" "For everything," she said. "For believing in my grandfather, for making today possible, for showing us all what real greatness looks like." Marcus inclined his head, deeply touched but never boastful. "Your grandfather believed in me when no one else did," he said. "I'm just paying it forward." Tears filled the bride's eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to lose this moment. Without thinking, she hugged him, a genuine, unfiltered act of gratitude. Around them, some guests gasped. It wasn't proper, some might say later. But in that moment, propriety didn't matter. Only truth did, and the truth was beautiful. When the bride finally pulled away, Marcus gently handed her a small envelope. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "May your marriage be built the way true empires are built, with patience, trust, and quiet strength. Marcus Johnson." The bride clutched it to her chest, knowing she would keep it forever. Marcus smiled one last time, then turned back to his quiet orbit around the celebration, moving not with duty, but with purpose. The night wore on. People danced. People laughed again, softer this time, humbled. But no one would leave without carrying a piece of Marcus Johnson's legacy with them. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about power, it wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about transformation, about seeing, truly seeing, for the first time. And for the first time in a very long while, many of them did. Not because Marcus demanded it, but because Marcus lived it. And the ones who truly saw, they would never forget. Because once you encounter real greatness, silent, steady, unstoppable, you are changed forever. The stars had fully taken their place overhead now, blanketing Greenwood Estate in a soft, velvet dark. The music slowed to a gentle hum. The lights under the tents glowed warmer, softer, as if the entire world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. And still, Marcus Johnson moved with that same quiet grace. No spotlight followed him. No grand toast was given in his name. No banner draped from the chandeliers to announce his triumph. He didn't need any of that. His legacy wasn't written in fanfare. It was stitched into every inch of that night, in the laughter of the bride, in the tears of the groom's father, in the humbled silence that lingered long after the music played. At the edge of the lawn, Marcus paused. He watched his families pose for photos, their smiles a little more genuine now. He saw friends raising glasses, not to brag, but to cherish. He heard laughter, real, soft, free. It was different. They were different. Maybe not all, maybe not forever. But tonight had shifted something in them. Tonight had reminded them that true greatness isn't in what you own or what you wear. It's in how you walk through a world that underestimates you and lift it without ever needing to crush it. Marcus smiled. Mission accomplished, promise honored, lesson delivered, and not a single word needed to be shouted to make it stick. Behind him, someone called his name, the event planner, breathless and slightly tearful. Mr. Johnson, she said, rushing over, voice cracking slightly. Thank you for everything, for trusting us. Marcus simply nodded. No need to thank me, he said gently. Just remember, sometimes the people you overlook are the ones holding you up. She swallowed hard and nodded, understanding more than she could say. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, not to impress, not to correct, but simply because he moved through life with precision, with dignity. One last time, he glanced back at the sprawling scene he had helped create. The music, the lights, the love. All of it humming like a living heartbeat in the night air. Then, without a word, Marcus Johnson turned, tucked his hands into his pockets, and disappeared into the velvet shadows, leaving behind a night and a lesson no one would ever forget. Because real kings don't announce their reign, they don't demand thrones, they build kingdoms quietly and leave the world forever changed. Thank you for staying with this story till the very end. If you found inspiration in Marcus Johnson's quiet strength, imagine what you can build, patiently, powerfully, without ever asking permission.